For our final week of medical ethics, we want to extend the principles of bioethics beyond their original purpose by examining animal experimentation as a bioethicist. In 2009, in the United States alone, over 101 million non-human animals were used in experimentation, although not all of this was specifically medical experimentation. While there is law on the books aimed to protect animal research subjects, there are many exemptions made. So of that roughly 101 million, only about 1.13 million were the sorts of animals that receive any sort of protection. These include any mammal other than rats and mice. So for instance, rabbits, dogs, cats, etc. But rats and mice are the most commonly used animal in experimentation, with about 100 million used each year, and they are exempt from protections under the law. Birds, amphibians, reptiles, and animals used in agricultural research, which could include cows and pigs, are also all exempt from the minimal protections available to some mammals. And for all of these animals, but especially those not exempt from all protections, experimentation often involves a great deal of pain with little or no use of anesthetics or analgesics. So why so much experimentation? Well, in terms of medical research, it is because United States law requires all medical therapies to be tested on animals prior to human trials, but never instead of human trials. Our focus this week, then, will be on analyzing animal experimentation and attempting to answer two general questions. Is it ethical, and is it effective? These two questions could come apart. It could be that the testing is not ethical, but it is very effective. It could also be that it is not effective, but because maybe animals don't really matter much, morally speaking, it is okay to still do. But likely, for our purposes, the two questions will be related. The more ineffective the testing is, the more ethically problematic it is. Carl Cohen, in his article, The Case for the Use of Animals in Biomedical Research, gives us the standard argument in favor of animal experimentation. The basic argument has not changed for quite some time, as philosopher John Dewey also made the exact same case back in 1926. The basic argument is also what Ray Fry, in his article, called the appeal to benefit. The basic argument goes like this. First, it is admitted that animal experimentation does cause pain and suffering, and perhaps even a great deal of pain and suffering for the animals used. Second, however, it is also stated that animal experimentation produces great benefits. It has in the past and will continue to in the future. Humans have benefited from animal experimentation with prevented or reduced pain and suffering and the alleviation or cure of many diseases and illnesses. So, the conclusion is that when you weigh out all the benefits and harm for all those affected, when you do a utilitarian calculation, animal experimentation is justified, even if it involves pain and suffering. This can either be because, as Cohen claims, animal pain matters less than human pain, and so even if there is a lot more of it, it doesn't carry the same moral weight, or it can be because even though the pains and pleasures are weighed equally, the benefits for humans is just greater, especially given that the benefits would extend across generations. This is the basic argument we want to start with, since it is effectively the only argument in favor of animal experimentation. Scientists no longer deny that animals feel pain and suffer, especially since much of their research on animals relies on determining whether or not the therapy is causing pain or not. So the argument that animals are just like tools, and so using them is not morally worse than using a microscope, is really not one defended anymore. There are various ways to analyze this argument, and we will focus on three approaches. The first is Fry's objection, that the appeal to benefit argument justifies painful human research too. The second is the one that Cohen deals with in his article, the objection that non-human animals, or at least some of them, have rights like human beings and therefore cannot be used as mere tools. And the final approach is to question the claim that animal research is actually beneficial, either at all or to the degree necessary for the appeal to benefit to be successful. So we will start with Fry's criticism of the appeal to benefit. For those interested, Fry recently passed away but was a professor here at Bowling Green State for 26 years and is a well-known figure in moral philosophy. On Fry's view, Cohen is giving us a false view of the situation. It is not animal experimentation or lose benefits of experimentation. There is another option. We could experiment on human beings. As he explains, there are good reasons already to experiment on humans in the first place. They are a guaranteed accurate model for human beings, unlike non-human animals. Moreover, the appeal to benefit is basically just the same claim the Nazis used to justify their medical experiments on humans. Sure, it is painful for the subjects, but the benefits are so great that the pain is justified. So Fry's basic claim is that if the appeal to benefit justifies painful animal experimentation, then it justifies painful human experimentation as well. From this, two options are open for us. We can accept that painful human experimentation can also be justified based on the benefits, but given people's views from week 2 of this class, I doubt any of you will really want to go that way. So instead, Fry tells us we need to argue for a moral difference between humans and non-human animals that makes the appeal to benefit apply to them, but not to us. So what options do we have for this moral difference? Certainly some could appeal to religious reasons, but those reasons cannot be evaluated, so we should mostly set those aside. Especially for our purposes, thinking about this as bioethicists, we must set aside religious reasons, since even if those reasons are good, they are not ones that everyone could accept, given the great diversity of religious belief. Moreover, absent denying animal suffering completely, even religious reasons do not clearly get out of the argument. Fry also briefly mentions the idea that life is sacrosanct, or must be respected, but that doesn't clearly make human life any different from non-human life. So instead, Fry thinks that most people will end up depending on the view that human beings are more valuable than non-human animals because human lives are more complex, or because they contain many more possibilities for enrichment. Fry thinks it is this sort of approach that most people have in mind when they assert that human lives are more valuable than non-human animal lives. But is this approach successful? Well, of course, Fry thinks not. It is pretty natural to think human lives are much more complex than non-human lives. We have a robust audible language, we have mathematics and past knowledge through generations, and we even have reality TV. But who is the we are talking about when we discuss all of these complexities? It certainly isn't each and every human being. In philosophical thinking, especially in animal ethics, there is a common argument called the argument for marginal cases. Marginal cases, in this argument, refers to biological human beings that lack the sorts of capacities or complexities that are often appealed to in trying to argue for the superiority of humans to non-humans. Fetuses, infants, the comatose, the senile, the severely cognitively disabled are all lacking some of the things appealed to when arguing for how awesome humans are. The ability to solve complex problems, knowledge of the self, rationality, language, moral agency, which is the ability to make moral decisions, are all lacking in fetuses and infants for sure, and at least some of these are lacking in the case of the comatose, the senile, and the severely cognitively disabled. But surely such humans should still not be used in painful experimentation, even if it will produce great benefits for other humans. Or at least that is the view many, if not all of you, supported in week 2. So you are stuck in the following trap, which can be understood as a reductio ad absurdum argument. We assume, given the current argument, that complexity of experience, or particular high-level capacities that humans possess, morally distinguish them from non-human animals. But, if this is true, then the argument for marginal cases tells us that not all human beings are morally equal. Of course, it is unlikely we would want to accept this conclusion. Instead, we will insist that all human beings are morally equal. But if that is true, then our initial view, that complexity of experience or particular high-level capacities morally distinguished humans from non-humans, is false. So where does this leave us? Well, it doesn't prove that humans and non-human animals are morally equal. What it proves, so far, is that we have no good reason for holding that humans are superior. There may be a reason, but we don't know what it is yet. Or, of course, you can just decide that not all humans are morally equal, and therefore we can do painful experiments on some humans too, namely the marginal cases like infants and the severely cognitively disabled. That, in fact, is the route Fry takes elsewhere in his work, but I presume most of you don't want to follow him there. Fry was a staunch defender of utilitarianism, and utilitarianism rejects the idea that any being has moral rights. But certainly, that may be something that you think distinguishes humans from non-human animals. Humans have rights that protect them from being used for the benefit of society, but non-human animals do not. Cohen, in his article, argues in this way, and so attempts to refute the argument that at least some non-human animals have moral rights. It is important first to get clear on what we mean when we talk about moral rights. People use the term rights a lot, often improperly or confusedly, but there are also multiple ways to use it properly. For instance, there are legal rights and moral rights, and perhaps other sorts of rights. But we are particularly interested in moral rights, which are different from these other sorts of rights. Moral rights, in general, are moral claims or potential moral claims that a being, the rights holder, can make on moral agents. Moral agents are those beings that we can hold morally accountable for their actions. So normal adult humans are all moral agents, but we tend not to consider the severely cognitively disabled, young children, or infants to be moral agents. If they do something we would call morally wrong, we don't condemn them as doing something morally wrong like we do normal adults. Non-human animals, too, are not moral agents. A simple moral right you may think we all have is to not be used as a means to another's ends. Recall the story of Amalas, where many of you felt that what was wrong with the situation was that the child was being used to prop up Amalas, but had no say in the matter. You were, implicitly, claiming that the child had a right not to be used as a means to others' ends. Had he agreed to the situation, then the ends would have been his too, and that may have made things fine, or at least better. But the fact that he didn't, the fact that he was just used without his consent, made it wrong. So the question then is, do non-human animals have rights? Well, for Cohen they do not, but in order to decide this question, we have to first know what makes it so humans have rights. According to Cohen, the necessary characteristic of any being that has rights is that it is morally autonomous, that it is capable of moral reasoning and moral judgment. Another way to put this is that for a being to have rights, it must be a moral agent. Thus, his claim that only members of a community of moral agents have moral rights. On his view, non-human animals are not morally autonomous, and therefore are not moral agents, and are outside any community of moral agents. Therefore, they do not have a right not to be used as a means to others' ends, like we humans do. The immediate question we may want to ask about this approach is the same one Fry asked about the appeal to benefit. Does this approach to rights mean that many human beings also do not have rights? Namely, any of those that are not morally autonomous, that lack the ability to reason morally? Cohen's answer, and his same response could be used to respond to Fry's earlier argument, is that while it is true that marginal case humans do not have the relevant capacity, in this case they are not morally autonomous, it doesn't mean they are not part of the moral community. This is because they are of the kind human, which grants them access to the moral community and the rights that go along with it. So, does this response work? It will be helpful at this point to put this discussion of rights and who has them in the context of the bioethical principle of autonomy. Recall that the principle of respect for persons, as stated in the Belmont Report, includes two parts: respecting the decisions of autonomous agents, which is what we have mostly been focusing on, and also protecting those individuals that lack or have diminished autonomy, which is at issue in this case. Marginal case humans lack or have diminished autonomy, yet we nevertheless believe that they deserve protection because of this, not that they deserve to be used however we want in painful medical experiments. But can Cohen's argument allow us to say this? It looks like it can't. Although he responds to the marginal case argument, the rest of his article requires making distinctions between individual humans, who can have a guilty mind or respect moral claims made on them by others, from individual non-human animals who can never have a guilty mind or respect the moral claims made on them by others. But certainly some marginal humans are like this too. Those born with severe cognitive deficits have never and will never be moral agents or be morally autonomous in this sense. The argument that because they are human, they will still get into the moral community is a separate argument. It is one that depends on having certain DNA, regardless of mental and physical features, and certainly merely the DNA one has cannot be what makes one being morally superior to another. However, we can agree with Cohen that no human being loses its rights merely due to disability, but that isn't because it is still human, but because it is still a being deserving of respect. Respect, in its case, demands we protect it, though, rather than just respect the decisions it makes for itself. But this exact same approach can apply to non-human animals as well. The basic argument regarding rights and autonomy, then, would be this. 1. All human beings have moral rights. 2. Not all human beings are morally autonomous. So we conclude from that, to be a rights bearer cannot depend on being morally autonomous. And thus, non-human animals can in fact be rights bearers, despite not being morally autonomous. So this argument doesn't prove that non-human animals do have rights, but what it does show is that Cohen's argument that it is impossible for them to be rights bearers is false. If marginal case humans can be rights bearers, then so can non-human animals. At this point, it is important to mention the common objection raised to the idea of animal rights. Does that mean dogs should be able to vote? And the answer is, of course, no. But we also do not let infants vote. And we also do not let the severely cognitively disabled decide on their own medical treatment. Just because different beings all have rights does not mean they all have the same rights. This is obvious in the case of humans, so it shouldn't be a problem in the case of non-humans. Put very simply, whereas Cohen thinks that in order to have rights you have to be a moral agent, we can say instead that moral agents and what are often called moral subjects can also have rights. An infant's a perfect example of a moral subject. You can't do anything you want to it. There are things that would be morally wrong to do to it, but there is nothing that it would do to you that could be morally wrong, given that it itself is not capable of moral decision making. So that is all for part 1. When we move on to part 2, we'll focus more in on the other 3 principles of bioethics.